My name is Sam Herzberg, and I'm with San Mateo County Parks, but I'm also on the Trail and Stewardship Committee of the Bay Area Trail Collaborative. Welcome to our 7th Trail Talk. We have today the subject of the Santa Cruz Mountain Stewardship Network State of the Trails Report, and this was Zionne and I were talking about how long we've been working on this, and I think this is about 7 years to get to this point. So this is the first presentation of the report, and we're really excited to have her give this presentation. The Bay Area Trail Collaborative is made up of 50 organizations, and we're trying to achieve a regional trail network spanning 2,600 miles in the Bay Area to connect 8 million residents. This is based on the Rails to Trails model, and it's expanded to the whole regional trail network, connecting us all together, coast side to bay side. We've had a number of our trail talks developed by our Trail Development and Stewardship Working Group. We've had talks on micromobility, wayfinding signage, trail design standards, maintenance strategies, and art along regional trails, which was a very popular webinar not too long ago. We're always looking forward to suggestions of other topics. If people have suggestions, we're going to get started with the presentation. I'm going to encourage everybody to stay muted. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and then Zionne can get to them at the end of the presentation. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to Zionne Fox from Peninsula Open Space Trust, who's been the project manager for this complicated project. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Hello, everyone. How's my sound, Ben? Or start?
Sounds good.
Or Jesse, sorry.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Oh, good.
Back in the day. Thanks. Actually, let's start with the slide back. I'll introduce myself in a moment, but I wanted to introduce the Santa Cruz Mountain Stewardship Network first, because this is the State of the Trails is a project of the Santa Cruz Mountain Stewardship Network. And the mission of that network is to cultivate a resilient, vibrant region where human and natural systems thrive for generations to come. And this network is a region-wide and cross-sector collaboration of 24 organizations who are committed to practicing effective stewardship on their lands, on the lands that they own, and coordinating their efforts with each other and to enhance stewardship on a regional level. And so the Stewardship Network is a vehicle for collaboration and coordination, and they engage in emergent processes. So their member organizations come together in discussion through interaction, issues that are of collective importance emerge, and ideas to address the issues are generated. And then through the network process, members find ways to move ideas into action. And so that's how the State of the Trails project was born. Back in 2019, I facilitated a trails workshop for the member organizations and agencies, and this idea came up of we need a state of the trails for the Santa Cruz Mountains. And then we've spent years formalizing what would that look like, what would it be, and now we just completed the study in May of 2025, so very recently. All right, next slide. So yeah, my name is Zionne Fox. I am the Director of Relational Conservation at the Peninsula Open Space Trust. POST is a nonprofit land trust that protects open space on the peninsula and in the South Bay for the benefit of all. And we often play a unique role in terms of unique for land trusts as a facilitator for regional cross-jurisdictional collaborations and projects. And that's exactly what the State of the Trails was. So we're able to step back out of the silos of owning any particular lands, although we do acquire and transfer lands, but we can step out of the silos that public agencies are often in and play a leadership role across jurisdictional boundaries. Great, so here's our agenda for the presentation. We'll go over essentially the outline of the State of the Trails report that we recently completed. So I'll give a project overview. I'll outline the methodology and what we learned through the user and non-user survey, and the opportunities and analysis that was done, the outcomes and next steps, and then I'll open it up to questions and response. And I'll mention that in this presentation, I don't go into how the project was facilitated or our project management strategy or tactics or reflections on the lessons learned with that, which could be a whole presentation in itself. And I'm also happy if people have questions about that at the end, I'm happy to answer those questions as well. All right, so what is the State of the Trails project? What we did was look at how we, as in the partner organizations who own and manage land in the Santa Cruz Mountains, how we could work together across jurisdictional boundaries to meet our goals for a connected, resilient, and equitable trail system within the Santa Cruz Mountains. And so this map shows the definition of that boundary, which is essentially the boundary of the area that the Santa Cruz Mountains Stewardship Network works in. So this included looking at how we can balance biodiversity and cultural resource protection, recreation, and equitable access for both those who currently use the trails and those who do not, ensuring that users' needs are being met. And so this was the first time that the Santa Cruz Mountain Stewardship Network partners have come together to consider the entire area's trails, resources, and communities as an interconnected whole. And each partner, the idea is that each partner can then use what we learned to create individual plans and projects that help meet these collective goals. So this is the project study area. As I mentioned, it's basically the same geographic scope as the Stewardship Network's boundaries, Santa Cruz Mountains. The study area and surrounding lands are home of Native American tribes, including the Amamutsun, Muwekma Ohlone Indian tribe of the San Francisco Bay Area, the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone, and the Tamiami Nation, and we engaged them all in this project. It covers nearly 2,200 square miles. Most of the landscape within the study area is inland, but also includes approximately 77 miles of coastal landscape, including both the Pacific Ocean and the San Francisco Bay coastlines. It crosses 3 counties. It encompasses the entirety of Santa Cruz County, the majority of San Mateo County, except the areas east of Highway 82, and the portion of Santa Clara County to the west of Highways 101, 85, and 82. So there are approximately 1 million people living within the study area, according to Cal EnviroScreen. And there's a variety of conditions that exist within the study area boundaries, from urban and rural communities to protected open space areas like preserves and state parks. And these open space areas account for approximately 334 square miles, or 28% of the land area. Next, so here are the partners that are part of the Santa Cruz Mountain Stewardship Network, and not all of them engage in public access and recreation. So, but everyone was invited to the table to be a part of this project, and we had about 18 representative organizations on our trails team in this collaborative effort. And then here on the next slide is a kind of a written out description of the structure of our team. And we had a project management team that was made up of myself, Michelle O'Haron, who is a consultant. We hired an outside consultant to help be on the project, help our group facilitate the internal project management of this such a complex project. And Dylan Skybrook, who is the Stewardship Network's manager. So the three of us were the project management team, and I could like wax poetic about how well that worked. And then we had the representing members of the Stewardship Network who were participating regularly and in depth and part of our Trails Advisory group. We also, of course, had a consultant team that was made up. The prime consultant was Alta Planning and Design, and then they had sub-consultants from Stillwater Sciences, SWCA Environmental Consultants, and Dr. Patrick Tierney, who helped with the survey. And then we had tribal representation as well. That's okay to pass or to go to the next one. So that was the structure. And the project objective was to combine the GIS data that we had and collected and had and cleaned up on the existing conditions of the entire trail system network and the environmental conditions, combine that with the community and user survey that we conducted as part of the study. And we collected all of that and put it all together and layered it on top of each other and analyzed it in all different ways to help inform cross-jurisdictional regional trail planning and management decisions aimed to support biodiversity conservation in a seamless network of interconnected, enjoyable, socially and physically equitable and inclusive trail experiences in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And so we relied on analyzing quantitative and qualitative data from trail users and non-users from a survey that we conducted where we got over 2,700 survey responses. And that was a survey we conducted in person and online. And then the consultant team synthesized the available land manager GIS data, those survey results, a whole series of planning documents that exist for the trail systems within this bigger network. They include publicly available or analyzed also in this publicly available environmental, recreation, and transportation data. They established best practices and came out with a SWOT analysis, so the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to analyze. So I'll be going through a high-level overview of all that. Project goals. So we had 4 goals that guided this project as looked through the overarching lens of sustainability, which was defined as the interface between trail development and access and the environment. So these goals were adapted from California State Parks, the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, Santa Clara County Parks, Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, and the San Mateo County Parks policies and principles. And the goals were in these four categories. So enacting purposeful design and planning that meets the broad recreational users' needs, foster equitable access, and reducing barriers to that access, balancing recreation and biodiversity conservation. This was a real big one that this network has talked a lot about, and is how to balance recreation with conservation, and protecting natural and cultural historic resources while planning, designing, building, and maintaining trails. All right, we'll go into what the trail user and non-user study and results look like. So I've pulled out a sampling of the survey results to share with you. The survey analysis was much more exhaustive than I can share now, but I pulled out for this audience what I thought might be of particular interest. But the methodology was that the survey was administered at over 20 locations in the Santa Cruz Mountains, including at trailheads, including at public events, as well as through an online portal between a time period of September and November 2023. So we had 2,797 respondents to the survey. 1,600 about reported that where they live, their home zip code was in the study area boundary. 93% identified themselves as trail users as opposed to non-users, and this was an interesting component of the survey because we were really hoping for a larger representation from the non-user community, because the study really wanted to assess why people were not using trails. And those, based on one of our first questions of the survey, it funneled that person either into two separate surveys, either a user survey or a non-user survey. So there was that threshold moment, which helped define which survey they take. And I can share more about the just how that shook out in terms of not getting the quantities of non-users in the survey that we wanted. Most survey respondents resided in California, and the findings, as I mentioned, was integrated into GIS data for analysis in all kinds of ways that I'll share here. Okay, next slide. Here are the demographics of the trail users. So not the non-users I'll mention in a minute, but the trail users were mostly between the ages of 35 and 74. That constituted 73% of the survey respondents. 66% report having no one in their household over 65. Majority were white. There's almost even split between people who identify as male and female. And although the question wasn't so binary, most were from the 3-county area that we are working in, and the vast majority have access to a private vehicle. Next. Most of the survey respondents reported that they live in the southwest part of the study area. So where it's darker, there's higher quantities of respondents, and this was respondents by zip code, as well as near the more developed areas to the east and north. So this map gives you graphically the sense of where people were coming from and where most of the respondents were. Darker blue is higher quantity, and then the tan is less. All right, next slide. So here this shows the visitors from the users on the east side of the study area per zip code. So the black dot, if you can see that, shows the origin zip code, and the line shows their destination. So the darker the line, the more visits between that origin destination, or between the origin and destination. And so this is showing where people who live on the east side of the study area, kind of where they are going to and from. And then the next slide shows the same data, but from the origin being from the west. And so this was super fascinating. Just to one thing I just really appreciate about the study is taking the data from surveys and turning it into a graphical representation. So it's really easy for me, at least, to absorb trends. So this was where people are going to and from the east side of the study area. Okay, thanks, Jesse. Here are park visits. And so this is showing open space, that open space areas near Santa Cruz were the most visited across all of survey respondents. And that the question was something to the effect of which parks have you visited in the past 12 months? And so it was a reflective question about the past year of use. And so, for example, we had 1 in 4 trail user respondents stated that they had visited Wilder Ranch, and 1 in 5 respondents had listed Henry Cowell redwoods. So the darker the color, the more visits. You can see those trends. And then the next slide shows that same data in table form, which the report also had. So it listed exactly which parks were essentially the most visited, most popular across the Santa Cruz Mountains. And it was really interesting to see that the top three were state parks in Santa Cruz County. And this table had, just so for context, this table had 4 more pages onto it, or was 4 pages total. So long list, got down very granular, into the granular level of where people are visiting. And then this is where some of the analysis got really interesting, is this consultant team was able to analyze and break down not only where people were going, but which users were going where. And this is one of the big questions of the study we had, is what are the existing conditions of the trail and how people are using them by user group, and also where is the demand, and how might that inform how we do trail planning individually as organizations and agencies, and how do we come together collectively to try to respond to the existing conditions of the use of these network trails, and also the demand. So here is the open space areas most visited by hikers. So the darker color equivalent is the equivalent of more visits, and you can see the trends there. So that's where hikers who responded to our survey are going. And then the next slide shows runners and those trends. The next slide shows mountain bikers, the most visited open spaces by mountain bikers. Darker purple in Santa Cruz. And then the next slide breaks that down, breaks the bikers down by, these were the gravel and road bike users. And then just letting you absorb it a little bit. And then here are the e-bike users. I haven't correlated or cross-referenced this map to areas that are actually open or not open to e-bikes, but that could be an interesting thing to see too. How much our policies and rules and regulations actually guiding the outcome of how people are using the trail systems. And then I think this might be the last one, is the equestrian use. And I was surprised by this there, and that the highest use was actually in Santa Cruz County. For some reason I had thought that the other counties would have a higher equestrian use, but that wasn't true. All right, and then here we also have most visited open spaces by users with dogs. Okay, so the top 3 users from the survey were hikers, bikers, and runners, with dog walkers as a very close fourth. I think they were 1% off between runners and dog walkers. And so, yeah, and then it shows you on the graphs all the other users, including, like, we asked, like, are you birding, are you climbing, people could fill in too, are you out there with kids, are you camping, are you doing multi-day trips. So there was a lot of options there. And then just to break down the bikers, as the lower table or graph shows, that most bikers are mountain bikers by pretty significant amount. And then there's the road and gravel, cross bikes, e-bikes, 10%. Okay, So demand and access mode. So many people, I don't expect you to be able to like see these, what these all mean. So I'm just going to give you the highlights. Most people are regular visitors to open space areas, with 51% reporting that they visit open spaces weekly and 11% report visiting daily. Most people visit multiple parks and open spaces in the region. Few people spend the night or all day. So 65% report that they spend a half a day out on the trails, and 25% spend an hour. And the vast majority of respondents said they access these areas by car. Next slide. So access mode by zip code. So most survey respondents drive, and there are a few other ways that people get to their parks and open spaces. So 18% said they get there by bike, and then it shows where those where those survey respondents who answered that way, where they live. So you can see the biggest dot is in the southern, kind of near Santa Cruz, and so that's where the majority of those people who responded as getting to their trailheads by bike, that's where they live. All right. So non-user demographics. So these are the people who said that they had not visited any open space areas within the 12 months prior to taking the survey. And then they got funneled to a non-user survey that had just a differentiation or different questions, because we didn't want to, if we asked the same questions, it'd be we wouldn't be answering the questions we wanted if we asked people who don't use trails all the questions about where they visit trails. So instead, we were trying to unpack, well, why? What would you be looking for? Where would you get your information? And so we had only 187 people stated that they hadn't visited open space in the last 12 months, which was 7% of the total survey responses. And we really recognize this being an unfortunate shortfall of the project, despite a really concerted effort to engage non-users. A lot of our partner organizations that were engaged in the project were getting out into their community and knowing their community, identifying where they thought they could have people take this survey. And that included going to farmers markets, included going to local events, cultural events outside of the realm or of recreation or where we might expect to find trail users. We were just trying to think broadly, like where can we just find people in community. And so the small sample size makes it challenging to consider survey findings as indicative of a general non-user sentiment or demographics. However, the report did go into the results of the survey, and I'll share them. So for non-users, the demographics that they were mainly between the ages of 18 and 54, with a third saying that there were adults over 65 in their households. So it's a little different than the user survey. A majority identified, a bit of a higher majority, identified as being women. Most identified as white or Asian, although Spanish was the primary non-English language spoken, followed by Cantonese Mandarin. And a large majority have access to a private vehicle. And there's a range of counties of residence, but most were from the 3-county project area. So most non-users reported living in the southern part of the Santa Cruz Mountains Stewardship Network's boundaries, or from the more urban areas to the east. So the darker the color here, the more survey respondents. And this was partly due to where our partners who were engaged in the project and getting the word out, where they were able to successfully reach community. So we had a really strong partner engaged in the project in the Santa Cruz County Parks Department, and so that's also reflected in the survey. Okay, opportunity analysis. This is where it gets more complicated. So next slide. We were looking to identify areas well suited for additional trails, additional recreational amenities, or access investments. And that's our consultants were saying this is a great analytical challenge, well suited for geospatial study. And so that's what they did. We had 4 criteria that was evaluated. So access, measuring the opportunity to invest in trails without that didn't have sufficient access already. Demand was measuring the amount of existing demand there is for the recreational opportunity. Equity measured the relative index of disadvantage for communities within the study area. And then sustainability measured the relative environmental hazards and vulnerable habitat. So each criterion was evaluated separately and then weighted equally into a final suitability score, which represents the most suitable areas for trail development, for trail investment, or the most suitable areas for additional conservation. And so that's where we were looking at both to really create a Santa Cruz Mountains that has the balance between recreation and conservation. So viewed as, and also the study was really viewed as a high level. We weren't looking at site specific or trail specific improvements or maintenance needs. And that was something that was really hard at first when we were working on this project, is to stay at that right high level, that landscape level study. So one thing that I'll come back to when I talk about recommendations and next steps is for this study, these criteria, as I just mentioned, were evaluated equally. So each was given a 25% weighting in the information they offered. And so the outcome is a certain way because of that. But things could be weighted differently, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But keep that in mind as we go through the outcomes. But I do want to mention before we go to the next slide that so a high opportunity for trails looks like, in terms of access, looks like there's low existing multimodal access. For demand, it looks like there's high demand for outdoor recreation. For equity, a high proportion of disadvantaged people. And for sustainability, a low environmental and habitat risk. So that's why we had data that went into each of these criteria, and then we put them all together and geospatially looked at where would there be high suitability for either trail investment or additional conservation. Okay, so I hope that makes a little sense. I left this in here because it's a great opportunity for me to share that I can't show you a map that shows all the existing conditions of the trail because we have a lot of confidential information in this report. And it's a good time for me to mention that this report is an internal facing document for the partners who were engaged in it and who provided data on their trail systems. We had an agreement with each other that we would all share our trail data, including some confidential data with each other, but that it would stay with each other. And so what I'm sharing today are things that are just not, it's the outcomes of the study and what we learned, and it's not sensitive, but there are things that is sensitive. And a great example of that is that we have knowledge of and also don't want to share the GIS data of the social trails. And so the unsanctioned trails in our region, and there's many reasons for that if you're curious about, I can answer, but I'm gathering that probably in this group, most people know why that we wouldn't want to share that broadly. Also, some conceptual trails are even too conceptual to put out there in the world and have on a map publicly. So it actually gave the project participants a lot of freedom to discuss and share data, knowing that it could be confidential, but it also means that this is an internal facing document. So I'm happy to share what we can, but it's not everything. Okay. So in terms of what we learned from that criteria analysis of the access, demand, equity, and sustainability, here's what the study found. So this was and I'll go through each of those criteria. So for trail access, this is what we learned. The darker colors means that there's less existing access, and the brighter yellow means that there's more existing access. And these maps I find just great because they're just very visual. Our consultant team had they could go super into detail and talk very technically about each tiny quadrant that they were studying, but just at a regional scale, it's nice to see the outcomes of the study. So here's in the northern study area where trail access is most lacking or prevalent. And then in the next slide, it shows the same criteria of access, but in the southern part of the study area. So again, the darker the color, the more darker color means less existing access, and the brighter yellow means more existing access. And if you're familiar with the Santa Cruz Mountains, basically the mountainous area, they're showing that the really deeper, higher mountainous areas have less access. And actually, because I work in this region, I also know that this is an area of some more private land ownership. So there's not much access. Okay, next slide is the demand. So the criteria of demand was mapped here in the northern area. So darker color means higher demand for trails. And this is from the survey results. And and I should mention that the access was based on the data that our partners had about where trails exist and are open to the public. And so that's coming from GIS data. The demand is coming from survey data. So the brighter yellow means that there's less demand, darker blue means higher demand. Okay, so that's the northern study area, and then there's the southern study area. I'll let you peek at that. So those are the trail demand scores. And then the third criterion was equity. So trail equity scores in the northern area shown here, the darker colors mean, the darker the color means the higher equity priority area. And then the brightest yellow means the lower equity priority area. And then the next slide shows same thing in the southern study area. And then the final criteria in the next slide shows the trail sustainability scores in the northern area. So the darker the color means the lower the sustainability risk. So that's habitats, environments with that are less vulnerable to the impacts of recreation. And then the brightest yellow means a high sustainability risk. And you can actually see that the hydrology in this map is really what I see when looking at these. And you can go to the next slide, shows the southern area. So yeah, the brightest yellows where we really see our watersheds coming to life in this map is where we have the highest risk, sustainability risk. Okay, so then put all together, all those 4 criterion layered on one another, each being weighted equally at 25%, we get the final results showing the highest overall opportunity score. So the darker color here identifies areas highly suitable for additional trail or recreation and amenity investments or access investments. So that's the darker color. And then the yellow is less opportunity. So understanding these suitability scores helps in prioritizing areas for conservation, for trail development, for recreation planning, and ensuring a balanced approach to managing the region's natural resources. And what the map showed to us and what the report stated in words was that urban areas such as Santa Cruz and Watsonville and South San Francisco in the San Bruno Mountain area stand out as having the highest suitability scores. Conversely, areas to the northwest of Ben Lomond Mountain and Boulder Creek, as well as areas on the northern border of Santa Cruz County and to the south of San Mateo County, have the lowest overall suitability scores. And so these lower scores indicate a lack of suitability for investment due to existing either existing sufficient access, it could be lower demand, also a combination of fewer disadvantaged communities, and environmental constraints. And as I mentioned, the criteria could be weighted differently. So let's say in our broad community of the Santa Cruz Mountains and everyone that was working towards land stewardship and recreation in this area all believed that what was most important was land conservation, then and habitat protection. We might weight that up 50% and make the other criteria a lower percent, and the results would be different. And then we would decide, and then that would influence how we take the results to do planning. So one more thing I just want to mention is that when we went into this study, we wanted to pretend as if there weren't boundaries between open space management agencies. What would it be like if we managed the Santa Cruz Mountains for trails and conservation as if it was one big unit? And that's one of the things I love about seeing these maps, is it helps to see our landscape as one big landscape, which it is, without the boundaries that we have over management and different policies and missions behind that guide the agencies who manage those lands. Okay, next slide. Outcomes and next steps. Let's do it. So here are the primary study outcomes. The project led to several that will benefit the Stewardship Network members. So the GIS data was consolidated from all the trail teams partners for the first time. And so that was a huge lift that took years actually. And so the data can now be used in different ways at regional or more local granular scales. Individual partners' data gaps, as well as the differences in how they collect data, their methodology, between the partners has been more clearly identified. So now it's there's the opportunity to work collectively and collaboratively to collect data differently so that we can have more accurate data that is speaking the same language between partners. Another outcome is that partners can now manipulate that sustainability model that I just walked through to look for opportunities based on their own different priorities at their local scale or at a regional scale. And we also now have this robust trail user surveys that can be used to inform future trail planning decisions and priorities. So data gap prioritization is a recommendation that came out of the study. Some of the data about where the existing conditions of the trails in the Santa Cruz Mountains had gaps that prevented ALTA from doing a more robust spatial analysis at a landscape level. Land managers had different amounts and kinds of data, making it difficult for them to do some of the kind of analysis that we had hoped for. So some of the recommendations were to focus on updating or prioritizing which of those gaps are worthwhile to try to overcome. Let's see. Yeah, and that's something that will be part of our next steps. And we're really kind of just starting a conversation, but around like what's the return on investment there? Because some data gaps exist, and we could spend years and a ton of money trying to fill them, but we're also trying to understand, like, is that worth it? Would that really change what we know and how we understand our trail systems, and would it guide our planning differently? So we're exploring that. And then there's the opportunity analysis represents a starting point, but the scoring is not concrete, as weights can for each subscore were the same. So future planning efforts might weight these differently depending on its focus. So if sustainability is weighted more heavily, it'll offer more emphasis on conservation rather than new trail development. And then let's see, using proxy data due to limitations outlined in the report was done, such as a lack of data on trailheads and accurate parking locations. So this prevented our study a bit from being more accurate, but that's where the data gap prioritization can come in. Okay, and then next was data. There was a big focus from our consultants on the data governance recommendations. And so the recommendation was to have a real holistic approach to data management that'll allow for more robust analysis and coordination between partners in the future. So they set out this whole data governance structure for us. And it's a framework for coordinated intake of data, or like housing of the data that was collected and cleaned up so much as part of this study, and then intake of so the governance structure helps us have this framework for what we do when partners intake more data and can update it, creation of more data, and then the management of it. And not many of our partners actually have the in-house expertise to manage this GIS data at such a in the robustness and complexity of it, and yet everyone wants access to it. And so this is a big deal for this project, is we want the data to continue to be current and evolve and be accessible. And so this is a big area of exploration in the months to come. So next steps. Next slide. Oh, sorry. Oh, Jesse, you're a little bit behind me. Sorry. Go to the next slide. That was the data governance. I wasn't catching that you were behind me a little bit. So here are the next steps, and basically where we are at. But right now, all the partners who were involved in this project, our Trails Advisory group, are absorbing everything we learned from the study and the process. And we're starting to establish working groups focused on more specific needs and questions that the study raised. So since we had so many partners and they're all guided by their own missions and interests, there are specific questions that are coming up as next steps. And some of those need working groups to work collectively. Like there's some people really interested in equity and equitable access to trails and open space. There's some people who are really, and agencies who are really focused on the demand and balance of landscape or habitat protection as it relates to biking use on trails. And then there's some partners like Santa Cruz County Parks who don't have a trails master plan at all yet. And that's one of the reasons why they got engaged in this project is they wanted the data, like a foundation of data and information, all the surveys to help inform a trails master plan for their county, which didn't exist yet. So they're going to be taking the data and information and doing something on their own. I'm sure with collaboration and support with all the new partners that they've been working with and colleagues that they've developed relationships with. So that's an example of what's going on in terms of next steps. We have a lot of opportunity to improve the data governance and how we manage this data and make it available to each other. There's conversations around data gaps, as I mentioned, and which ones could be fruitful to try to fill. And we're engaging GIS expertise to use the collated partner data to look at the gaps and opportunities at a regional scale. We're thinking about how we can manipulate the weighting differently and to in the sustainability model to look at to prioritize different ways to prioritize recreational access or conservation. And then there's also applying what we learned into the different partners' planning efforts, like I mentioned with Santa Cruz County. And then we're also, there's as it relates to equity, there also is an interest in how to engage more non-users in the planning process and the consideration, so we can understand the needs and demand there. Yeah, so that's a synopsis in 50 minutes, and we have a little more time, so I am happy to answer questions.
Thanks, and that was a really, really great presentation. Really interesting study, and maybe we can start or just see one question in the chat from Tim. Tim, do you want to just go ahead and ask your question verbally?
Sure. Thanks for the demographics about who responded to the survey. I just wanted, and you got a little bit into the equity piece, but I was curious how the demographics who responded actually differed or was the same as the demographics of the population base served by the trail.
Oh, yeah. That's a great question. And the study the study does answer that, and I didn't include it here, and so I hesitate to try to answer specifically because I won't be accurate, but I can answer broadly, which is the user base, the user surveys do not match the demographics of our community. And I mean, just by saying that it's the users are primarily white answers that question. The report actually answers that more specifically. So if that's something that's like a particular interest of you for this geographic region, which I know you work in, so you could email me and I could give you the more specific answers.
Thanks.
And then that's I mean, and that's why I know at Post we really care about equitable access to open space, because we know there's a disconnect there in who's using the trails and who our community is. Yeah, thanks for your question.
Anyone can go ahead and raise your hand if you have a question. I'll ask one in the meantime. I'm not surprised that 88% of users are using cars to get to trails and open space, but that is like a illuminating number, and I feel like you have such good data, you know, in terms of where the most people are going or coming from and to which trails they are going. So do you think any like the next steps, like any of the working groups might be interested in like sharing some of this data with transit agencies and exploring like the possibility of building ways for those people to you know, not necessarily drive? And I imagine a lot of people who are biking are just biking to the trails to begin with. So
yeah, that's a great question, and something that was one of the questions of the study is in terms of access, not only how are people accessing, but what's available to them in terms of public transportation or active transportation, and where there might be improvements to the system there. So there are some recommendations that the study explored there. And I think, I mean, that's a great example of something that might come out of this study as a potential working group. Like, are there people that are really interested in doing advocacy around improving the access mode to the trailhead? That hasn't yet risen up, although this study, like we just completed this study in May, and with summer months, like our group hasn't met all that often since it's been done, and we're still absorbing. So that's something that might emerge. Also, I do think that there's a willingness to share this data with others that are maybe adjacent to the topic, aren't in the group, but might benefit from some of what we learned. So even though the report and this document's an internal document, it's not like there is a, like, if this can help others, that's great. And so we could share. And I'll just say also, but now we know we have data on the areas of highest demand, the areas of lowest equity, the areas that we want to invest most in leading people to or doing trail development, so it can really inform which are the priorities for improving active transportation routes. Like if we as land management agencies are improving access and sustainability in certain areas, then how can we have that match like what's done in the urban connectivity to those areas? And so they should be talking, that ultimately, like, we do want to talk, having that, those talking to each other.
thanks. Thank you. And I just see a question from Kimberly in the chat, but do these trails include roadway trails or is it or class 1 or 2 combined with sidewalk type trails near roads? So I think this is mostly natural surface trails.
Yeah, mostly natural surface. And this is like thanks for this question. Something that was hard for us to navigate in the beginning while we were defining the project and the project boundary, because we're looking at the Santa Cruz Mountains, but we can't look at it without like, how are people getting to the Santa Cruz Mountains? And so there are some like class 1 and paved routes that are included in the data as well, but it's a smaller majority. Yeah.
Got it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify in terms of the 3 counties. Santa Clara County was the first county in California to develop a regional trail plan in the late 1990s or early 2000, and San Mateo County was the second. And our trail plan is now over 20 years old. It was developed in 2001, and then Santa Cruz County has not developed a regional trail plan. In the meantime, there's a lot of active transportation plans that have been developed. So, one of the goals of this project, which is probably a follow-up step, is how do we connect transit? How do we connect to active transportation, pedestrians and sidewalks, to our regional trail network, so people don't have to get in a car and go every place? And so, this is a building block, but this is not the end result. And that, we're developing a list of, potential, how do we use this database to help us, take next steps and evaluate other options to connect people to these parks and open space through the regional trail network.
Thanks, Sam. And I appreciate you chiming in. And I'm just noticing that who's attending this call right now. And Sam, and there's a couple of us who are deeply engaged in this project, Sam Herzberg being one. I see Rebecca Coates-Muldoon from Santa Clara County Parks, big participant and highly engaged in this project. So I might be missing others, but if you have other insights you want to share, I welcome them. Any other questions?
I'll ask another question just on the data governance. Are you all developing plans to keep this data updated, or like have try to get every open space manager to follow the same procedure, and then like kind of submitting it to Post or someone to keep a unified database?
Yeah, so those are exactly the questions we're asking ourselves. Like, there's what would the ideal of what we would like, and then what everyone can actually do. Right now, it's looking like the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District will house and manage the data. They have the most robust ability, capacity, knowledge, and systems in place to be able to hold the data. And then what's interesting is that one thing that Dylan Skybrook, who I mentioned, manages the Santa Cruz Mountain Stewardship Network. He was deeply engaged in this project, but he's also engaged in many other projects, regional scale projects for the Stewardship Network that have nothing to do with trails, but that are coming up with like, or resulting in major like data housing issues, just like this, but on different topics. So some of you may or may not be aware of this like regional Santa Cruz Mountain vegetation data management project that was completed a couple of years ago. It's kind of similar, but different topic of focus. And so he's actually realizing that there's a real need across the Santa Cruz Mountains to have a data governance structure for many different areas of work, and ours being one of them. So now he's exploring, well, could we be collaborative across these like genres of work and learn from each other and have similar systems in place. And so the answer to your question is I don't know how it'll look yet, but there's definitely a need, and we want the data to be able to be current so that when people go back into it in 2 years and say and try to or in however long that they're looking at something relevant.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Ross, you want to go ahead?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I dropped the question in the chat too, but I was curious if Santa Clara County Parks and San Mateo County Parks with their trail master plans will be comparing those with the opportunity map that was generated from this. And maybe since Rebecca was involved in it, she included some, early visions of that map in the county trails master plan that just got put out.
Rebecca, chime in if you want, but it was interesting because this, as I remember the timeline, the Santa Clara County Trails Master Plan update happened first, and then this data came about. So that master plan actually was like an input to inform the data that came out here. And so, yeah, I don't know, Rebecca, do you want to chime in at all?
Sure. I mean, I think that that's a pretty accurate summary, Zionne, is that the countywide trails map update happened kind of, before and as this project was happening and was able to feed into it. So all of that maybe more specific planning that we did with the different cities and other jurisdictions was able to feed into this larger map as inputs. I think Sam's point earlier that the 3 counties are, well, there are different stages, right, of this trail planning process with Santa Cruz County not having any kind of county scale trail plan at this time. So I think, one of the things we really grappled with in this project was sort of how do you think about this data and the use of this data relative to the existing planning that has already been done. Because for Santa Clara County, a lot of the vision is already there, right? The sort of the A to B vision. And I think the scale of that planning is very conceptual, right? It's sort of how do we connect, this park to this other park or to this city kind of in this area. So I think there's a lot of nuance sort of, in on the ground planning that we can dive into more. I think it helps us think more about kind of the connections between the counties and how we're, maybe, serving each other's populations, if you will, and kind of how do we think about those relationships? How do we think about maybe like amenity planning or other things that are not necessarily like the specific trail routes that are built on the ground? And it can kind of inform us as we move forward into like different stages of maybe park planning or site planning, or as we think about developing like a specific trail. Are there insights? Are there ways that we can use this data to say, serve broader populations maybe than we've been serving? 'Cause, I mean, you saw some of the survey data, and some of those demographics are not necessarily representative of all of the people that we would like to be serving with these trails. So I think there's so much in there. It's really hard to kind of tease out some of the specific ways that this can be utilized, because I think that there's so much more that we can do. And I think hopefully, each of the agencies, as we kind of move forward with different planning efforts, or we move forward with joint planning efforts in certain subsections of this region, we can kind of dive back into that data and be able to use it to answer some more of those like targeted questions.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was a great addition.
I'll just chime in that this sounds like a great project for like a graduate school research team to look at the data and try to come up with some trends. That's what I did with East Bay Parks for my graduate kind of like capstone project. And I know it was a lot of kind of diving into the details that East Bay Parks just didn't have the staff time to do, and kind of a team of 4 graduate students had devoted to data analysis had more time to work on.
Ooh, I love that idea.
We can.
That would be a great way to build capacity for our group who are interested in a certain topic, answering some questions but can't do it themselves.
Yeah, I'll shoot you a follow-up email on that.
It's a great idea. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Cool. Well, thanks so much, Zionne. This was a really interesting presentation, and thanks, Sam, for introing the presentation. This will be up on our YouTube page. Let me see if I can quickly get a link before closing this.
Thank you all. It's good to be with you. Appreciate your listening and your questions. And reach out if you have more specific questions beyond what we were able to cover.
And I'll follow up with the YouTube link. So thanks again, everyone.